All right. Welcome to the Rise Up Podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Mitchell. On this show, I do my best to help you get out of your own way so that you can live a happy and healthy life that is actually on your terms and hopefully make this process a little bit easier for you. For many of us who have found it difficult to get to where we want to be physically, mentally, or wherever we want. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoy this episode. I'm gonna try to keep it sweet, short and sweet. When we were talking about pushing past plateaus, or essentially, understanding how to get unstuck with where you're at. A lot of people I work with, they've dealt with physical plateaus, but I also want to make sure that you understand this also covers like life plateaus where you kind of feel stuck in the same job, same situation. You don't really feel like you can do much about it, or you feel powerless, or you just feel stuck. All right. So ultimately, I want to give you a step-by-step framework because ultimately the best way we learn is, in my opinion, is understanding what we need to look for. Understanding why is definitely a big part of this, but understanding what we need to look for. How do we need to evaluate where we're at so then we can decide the course of action, the next course of action? Because a lot of people, when they're stuck, when they're in a plateau with whatever they have going on, they believe things have to take what they're doing and multiply it by 10. And maybe what they're doing just isn't ideal or conducive to what they want to do, and doing more of it might just make the problem worse. So really, and ultimately, and sometimes maybe we do need to keep persisting, and maybe it just might take a little bit longer than we expected, and we just need to keep going. So how are you going to know the difference between what you're doing? Is it the ideal thing, or should you pivot and try something different? So essentially, the first step to this, to pushing past a plateau, is to slow down, which may feel counterintuitive or may feel redundant, but really slowing down is one of the best things you could possibly do because a lot of our lives are go, 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 go all the time. And if we have this go, 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 go mentality, when we feel stuck, well, we're not really able to think all that clearly. So the goal is to slow down, to allow ourselves to start to think more rationally or more ideally for what is actually going on. If we're trying to make a decision with everything that's in the go go go, we're putting extra pressure on ourselves, or we're adding extra stress. And if you listen to my episodes before, when I talk about stress, our mind interprets all stress, all forms of stress, be it anxiety, overwhelm, whatever it is, the same way as it would interpret a life or death scenario. So this gets very, very difficult to actually think clearly. Our mind is going to think, how do I resolve the stress, this overwhelm, this discomfort as soon as possible? That's what our brain is wired to do. Our brain doesn't like discomfort, even though a lot of our lives are full of discomfort. Our brain wants to find the easiest way, or the quickest way to resolve that comfort. Now, a lot of those times, those decisions aren't always so ideal. So when we slow down and we take a breath and we just reduce some of the pressure that we're putting on ourselves, right? Well, I like to refer to this as we stop throwing gasoline on an already burning fire. Because if I use emotional eating for an example a lot of times. When we're stressed, overwhelmed, we turn to food to feel better, to feel more comfortable, but we have a weight loss goal. And the only way to lose weight is to be in a calorie deficit. So when we're dealing with stress or overwhelm, and then we turn to food to soothe our discomfort, to numb our discomfort essentially, and now we're adding extra calories into our diet, it is going against what we want. Now we took that discomfort that we were experiencing, add another thing or adding calories into our diet that goes against our weight loss goals, and this is where now we feel worse. We're like, oh, I should have done that. I shouldn't. I know better. I should have done better. I shouldn't have, like, whatever. Beat ourselves up, or we just feel guilty or whatever, right? That is throwing gasoline on a burning fire. And if we can learn to just slow down a bit and say, okay, before I make any decision, I'm just going to say, this sucks. I'm having a hard time, but just get out of the same thinking that you have been in. One of my favorite quotes from Einstein, and I might butcher it here, um, is a problem cannot be solved in the same mindset it was created in. So if we have a problem that was created when we were stressed or overwhelmed, trying to solve that problem in that same stressful state will probably more than likely push or perpetuate that same problem and not actually resolve it for the most ideal scenario. So if we learn to stop putting pressure on ourselves, to let go of the stuff that we can't control and just focus on slowing down and putting out, or not necessarily putting out the fire, but at least stop adding the gas to the fire, then we can start moving on to the next step. All right, the next step is just learning to assess honestly, being honest with yourself, looking at yourself in the mirror and asking yourself some tough questions. Have you been as consistent as you think you have been? Has there been certain deviations? Where are you at right now? What is different? Right. And it's just about assessment without judgment. We're not here to tear apart everything that you're doing wrong, right? There's certain points where yes, we need to be as pay attention to as much detail as we possibly can, but we need to do that in a state of mind that's not going to perpetuate more stress, more anxiety, more frustration. Because really, the goal of getting to where you or achieving your goal is important, but how we achieve your goal is even more important because ultimately how you do it is how you're going to keep it. So if you do it in a way where, you know, you've been super brutal and super harsh to yourself and like paying attention to every tiny detail and like you don't think that you can live like that for the rest of your life, like just like nobody, no one, none of us really think about it like that in the grand scheme of things. So when we just be honest and just assess where are we at, what has been different, has anything actually changed, right? And if we're just honest without judging ourselves, it's like, okay, yes, certain things have not gone my way. There's there's extra stress in my life. There's more emotions in the household, right? I've been arguing with my spouse. I've been having a hard time with my kids, and that's been impacting me. That's okay. You're a human being. Acknowledge that you're only human. You're not superhuman. Contrary to how we see ourselves, we think we should have it all figured out. We think we should always have the answer. We think we should always just do better. We are human, and being human is to be imperfect. And we're going to make mistakes, even though we know better, even though we've learned, even though we may have repeated the mistake over and over again. And I'm not saying that you're making mistakes all the time, but that's a big part of what gets us stuck is there's unknown human error that we have a hard time acknowledging because we're stuck in that go mentality, and we don't know how to see and assess ourselves without being like, well, I should or I could do better. Those ways of thinking, those unhelpful ways of thinking ultimately create a skewed view of what the actual data is saying. And hey, something might be different, and that's okay. But when we have this assessment, when we can talk to ourselves appropriately, the way that the way that that conveys that, hey, I just want what's best for me. You can't self-hate yourself or tear yourself down to change for the long run. I mean, you can create change in that mentality, but a lot of times it might not last because we're inherently stubborn and we don't like being told what to do, especially when we do it to ourselves in a very animalistic way. So all that being said, just after you slow down, after you take some pressure off yourself, and you learn to be honest with yourself, just assess honestly. This is just a review. Check in. This is why I love working with people and checking in with them. Just how are they doing? How are they feeling? How did they think the week went? Because ultimately, we get more information by them reflecting on the week, and then I get to ask questions to help them see any connections or any patterns that they themselves might not be able to see, because when you're living your life, your brain is going to make the more consistent things feel boring, and it's not going to pay as much attention to it because it's part of its routine. If you listen to my episode last week, a big part of what our brain does is put things on autopilot. So people have a hard time noticing their own tendencies because they deal with it day in and day out. When I get to talk to somebody and help them check in with themselves, by checking in with me, they're telling me what's going on. Then I get to ask them questions like, "Oh, hey, did you notice how there's stress going on? You're arguing with or your kids are arguing or something, and then that affected your decision here." And then a lot of times they don't even notice, they don't realize it because they've had that as a pattern for so long. So if we can learn to do that ourselves, right? You don't need a coach to have these conversations. It is still, but you don't need a coach. It makes it a little bit easier because you can just like you can tell somebody, then they can kind of point the things out for you. But if you learn to be honest with yourself and just say, hey, I am not always making the best decisions based off the circumstances I'm currently in because I'm assessing honestly, that's what leads us to number three. Number three is this is where you learn to adjust and make the decision that's more ideal for you. And this is how we start to tell if what we are currently doing is working or if what we're currently doing isn't working, right? So as we assess, oh, actually, before one more side tangent, going back to the assessment part, where are you at? What's going on? And then also, what's different? Like, what's different on you? Like, have you still been working towards the thing that you want? Has it gotten a little bit better? Have you noticed other changes? Right? Using weight loss, for example, because the easiest example, if the scale's not going in the right direction, but you have more energy, but you've improved digestion, you've noticed changes on your body, you feel more, you feel healthier, you feel better, right? Your clothes fit differently. Like that's also part of the assessment because if any of those things are improving, even though the thing that you think is supposed to improve more isn't, well, that's a sign that what you're doing is working. So keep going. And you wouldn't have to adjust anything. You just have to keep going. However, if you're assessing and you acknowledge the things that are different that have affected your consistency or affected your decision making, and you're also noticing that, well, the scale isn't moving and I don't feel all that much better. I feel more tired actually. Then when we move to the third part, when it's time to adjust, then we're going to look, then because we had that honest review with ourselves, we're going to pick one or two things that we're going to adjust. Um, we don't need to change everything because if we change everything, that's a lot. That's a lot of work. It's like, oh, I just need to eat cleaner. I need to work out more. I gotta say no to the desserts. I can't go out with my spouse or my family anymore. Like, um, I have to start fasting. I have to drink 2 gallons of water now. Like, there's so many things that we could start to amplify, but really, we don't need to do all that extra stuff. When in reality, if you pick one or two things after we assess and we realize, okay, because of my stressful situation, again, this is arbitrary, or this is a hypothetical example, but because of the stress going on, I've had a harder time being able to get my steps in. Had a hard time being as moving my body as much as I would like to. Cool. Let's pick that one because we assess like, hey, that is definitely different based off of what's going on in your life. So let's just focus on that one first and let's bring that one up. And if you're like, okay, that one's pretty easy. I've also noticed that my veggie content has not been as ideal. Cool. Now that we've assessed those things, so we're going to focus on increasing your movement again. That's it. And we're focused on adding at least one or two colors back into your diet on a regular basis. Keep it super simple when you're adjusting because the goal is to stay in the game. The goal is to keep pursuing the direction that you want to go in. And we don't want to lose momentum by creating overwhelm. We want to maintain momentum and even more so build momentum by making and deciding on things that are manageable that we can take action on and just continue it's like building a roaring fire. Sometimes the logs aren't going to be massive things that set the whole bonfire ablaze. There's just stuff that keeps the fire going. But that's still important. If anyone's been camping, and it's super cold, you just want to keep the fire going for as long as possible. Yeah, sometimes you want the bigger log so grows a little hotter, gets a little bit bigger, a little bit warmer. But if we just want to keep the fire going, well, that's probably going to lead us to a little bit more manageable decisions, get the easier to reach branches, twigs before we start chopping down trees and big pieces of wood. This is super important because most of the time plateaus or feeling stuck, it gets to a point where we decide what we're doing isn't worth it. We are met with so much disappointment, so much frustration that we think that there's no point. Why even try? And then we decide that we're not going to try. And then we accept this discomfort as what it's supposed to be. And the funny thing is, I mean, it's not funny at all. It's not funny. But we are able to adapt to anything and almost anything, excuse me, can adapt to being thrown in a volcano. uh, But when it comes to psychological and a lot of physical discomforts that we live in our day to day, we can adapt to those things and make something that's terrible bearable. It's the beauty of being a human. But it doesn't make it go away. Just because we adapt doesn't mean it's going to go away. And if we accept that that's just all we can experience, that's all we're going to get, it ultimately makes this process harder, a lot harder. So I want you to have these three steps to remember to check in with yourself, to slow down, be honest, and then decide if something needs to adjust or not. Don't make a irrational decision based off of temporary discomfort or a temporary situation that you don't really control that much, that you really didn't ask for. I want people to be able to check in with themselves, because ultimately learning to talk to yourself like a rational human being is a superpower, because then we get to actually decide what is more ideal for us. It is a skill, just like everything is. Riding a bike's a skill, learning to communicate's a skill, learning technology is a skill. Everything is a skill that we have to learn, and you're probably going to suck at it for a while. You're probably going to have a hard time asking yourself these questions. You're probably going to have a hard time seeing when you're stressed, when you're emotional, when you're anxious. Um, and so it's going to be hard for you to actually slow down and think clearly, or think in a way that's not the norm that you usually do based off of overwhelm and frustration. And it's going to take time for you to practice the assessment of this process, to talk to yourself and ask you, where am I at? What's different? Is anything changing in the right direction? Yes or no? Why or why not? Right? Those questions. If it's easier, write it down on paper. One of the most this is purely anecdotal, but this is something that has definitely changed my life in a lot of different ways, was just writing out my thoughts on paper. It's you get a completely different view, a different perspective on your thoughts when you see them on paper. Hearing them in your head and reading them on a piece of paper is completely different, because now you disassociate, or you disconnect a lot of the emotion and the beliefs away. Now it's on a piece of paper and you can look at it for what it is. It's just like it's an unfair way of thinking. So I like have people like just get all their thoughts, all the reasons they're stressed, they're overwhelmed on paper, and then decide. And that's their form of checking in. That's their form of assessing with themselves, to decide if something needs to change or not, or if they just need to stay the course and stop trying to get in their own way. So I want to keep this episode relatively short, and give you the tools to give you the ability to decide what's the best course of action for you. Is it just keep going, keep pushing through, and you'll get closer? Because if you are finding progress in other ways, that don't always that isn't always celebrated as much as like a scale and a scale weight or a dollar amount or whatever you're trying to push past. Like, if there's other forms of progress that you can identify, all you gotta do is keep going. But if there's no progress at all, there's no improvement in any aspect whatsoever, and you're honest about that, then pick one or two things based off your assessment that you realize have either slipped up or have been different from when you were seeing success before. Because ideally, if we're going to plateau, or if we feel stuck, we were seeing progress in some way, shape, or form. So let's assess what's different from then to now, and then improve one or two things to keep it manageable, to build up that momentum or maintain that momentum, so we don't end up spiraling and getting to that point where we just say, fuck it, I'm not doing this anymore. So hope you find it helpful. Hope you find this valuable, even in a small way. Super simple episode today, hopefully. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen. And if you found this helpful and you think someone else might enjoy it, I'd appreciate if you share this with at least one person. My entire goal is to hopefully help you with wherever you're at. And even if I never speak to you, I hope I'm able to make a small impact for you. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and I will see you on the next one.